Yeah, I guess the best way to start is to just say what I think everybody that's on this, saw what an incredible, college baseball game, and of course, well pitched game by both sides. Of course, Doug was tremendous, and I think tied a school record, if I'm not mistaken, with strikeouts tonight with 16, and their guy Hubert, really matched him and early on, and we just it was one of those games where, unfortunately, it comes down to, a couple plays, and we were able to just make a couple more plays than them. But certainly a super pitched game by them, and of course, Broadway, continues to. Be super at the end of the ball game, and it's what a luxury to have a guy like Taylor to be able to call on. But yeah, again, I think it was all about pitching, our from our side and their side, and not much offense on either side.
Ben Garrett.
Mike, after the fifth inning, Doug was pushing 100 pitches. He'd given up the 3 runs. His velocity was a little bit down, and then he dug deep and found it to keep going. What did you see from him that allowed him to keep extending and go that long?
Well, that's Doug, and we've all seen it, Ben, where when the game's on the line, he can take it to another gear. And we were talking about that on the radio, and watched him. Not that it's been a ton, but he's a guy that can throw 110, 115, 120 pitches. You don't want to do that obviously every week, but there's some guys that that hit a wall at 90 or 95, and he can always, with the game on the line, reach back and get a little something extra. And obviously we needed all of that tonight.
Trey.
At this point, does this feel like in the best pitching performance from Doug in his career so far?
Wow. Not ready for that, Trey. I don't know. Certainly, when you talk about moments and what we needed. I mean, he was really good. A couple of years ago against Clemson here in Game 2, and almost threw a complete game, if I remember right. And so he's pitched a ton of big games. I'm not going to go out on a limb and pick which one, but certainly we needed every bit of Doug today.
Nick.
Mike, you've talked a lot this year about how confident this team is in close games, big moments like this. What was the dugout atmosphere like when the lead went down? How did you guys kind of react in the dugout to the deficit, and how did you climb back?
I think they handled it great. Obviously, it was kind of a kick in the gut. We had that lead, and unfortunately, we weren't able to add on to that lead. But credit Hubert for that. I think it was more him and less of what we didn't do. But I thought our guys handled it well, like you said. We've handled those moments well all year. Being able to handle the adversity. This team just continues to handle tough moments. And again, I thought after a couple home runs, and you lose the lead, we hung in there. We kind of spoiled an inning that we had with bases loaded. But again, our guys, continued to hang in there and continued to set it up offensively.
Adam.
Coach, could you just talk a little bit about the play that Jacob made throwing it over to first?
Yeah, that was a huge play. In the eighth inning, Jacob had two relatively routine ground balls, to start the inning. And then Martin, I think it was Martin, that smoked the ball up the middle off, Broadway's calf, and looked like it was going to be a base hit. And, Gonzo comes across and bare hands it and makes a huge play. And in games like this, sometimes those are game winners. And when you look at that, not only does it keep the tying run off the plate, but it also, it keeps Cabell from batting, being the winning run at the plate, with, again, a lot more pressure, I think, than having to face him to start off an inning. So, giant play by Jacob.
Chris.
Mike, can you talk a little bit about the crowd atmosphere? From my vantage point, the crowd seemed to be hanging literally on every pitch from Doug. What
Yeah.
energy did that provide y'all?
Well, that's one of the big reasons that you want to be at home, and when you look at it statistically, why the home team and regionals do so well, and that's one of always one of our goals is to play at home. But tonight, in those types of games, kind of that heavyweight boxing match, you need that. You need the crowd, and I thought the crowd kind of helped Doug in some of those tough innings, and they could feel the big moments. And then, I think the place got really loud there at the end for the last 6 outs when Taylor took over.
Nick.
Mike, what happened with TJ on the kickoff? And what do you kind of say to a guy after something like that happens to him?
What the hell are you doing? No, I didn't even see it, to be honest with you. I mean, I saw the out. I don't know what happened. I'm assuming we'll have to see it on film, but my guess is just you got caught off and not paying attention and got a little too far off the base, obviously. But I don't see if I didn't know if he slipped, or I didn't see any of that.
Back
My
to Trey.
first answer is probably the correct answer.
Back to Trey.
And Mike, I'm curious just how, before this game, knowing what's at stake specifically for the Saturday winners bracket game, do you want the team to feel that pressure, knowing that a difference, depending on the result today, the difference is having to win 3 games between winning 1 game?
I don't understand the question. Do I want my team to feel the pressure?
Not feel the pressure, more so do you, I don't know how to explain this now that I think about it. Do you want them to be aware of that? Or is that something that, just going out there with the way this team's played all year, is it just, it's another ball game?
I think I know what you're asking. And, did we sit in the pregame and say, hey, this is why this game is so important? We don't do that, but I think you're not giving those guys enough credit. They as much as we try to tell them, hey, don't read the stuff on the internet, try to stay out of the news and all the blogs and all that, all the predictions and all those things. This is the life in their generation. They know so much more than we ever thought we'd know, right? Growing up, and so they know how it works. And so to me, the point is to not look at it that way. To look at it as, it's a huge moment, we all understand, but at the end of the day, when you hear the process and what does that mean, control what you can control, and what does that mean? It means the best way to have success is to not think about how big the moment is. The best way to have success is to not think that if I don't get a hit, we're going to lose, right? Or my batting average is going to go down. The best way to have success is just be where your feet are, to be able to control what you can control and have a quality at bat, make a good pitch, play defense. But the tough thing is to try to block out all the stuff that you're talking about. So no, absolutely not. We don't sit there beforehand and talk about how big the game is.